This is part 2 of our composition video, in which we're going to be kind of talking about drum beats, rhythm, and rhythmic music theory. And it's very much going to be a quick video discussing about rhythm and music theory about rhythm, but then jumping into how we are going to compose a drum beat. At the end of this video, hopefully, students will understand the difference between quarter, eighth, and 16th notes, understand what the word syncopation means, compose a 3-layered drum beat over 1 to 2 measures, and export their composition from NoteFlight as a MIDI file. You will then be able to import that MIDI file into Logic like we've done in the past and understand drum assignments in the MIDI library and make any necessary adjustments. Let's talk about note lengths. This is a rhythm music theory crash course, which, let's be honest, probably the last time you talked about music rhythm was when you sat in a classroom similar to this, whether you were dealing with Orff instruments like the kids in the photo on the left or boom whackers like the photo on the right. You might remember vaguely terms like doos and doo-days and doo-da-dadas, but that might be your only experience. Some of you might have the experience of tas and TTs and tiri-tiris or one and one eanda. But really, it's about dividing things. What we understand is that a whole note, technically a whole note is a note that fills in the entire area of a measure. Even if a measure is 2/4, 3/4, if you put a whole note, it fills in that spot. But typically a whole note has 4 beats in it. You divide that in half and you have a half note. You divide that in half, you get a quarter note. You divide that in half, you have an eighth note. Divide that in half, a 16th, and then a 32nd, and then a 64th, and then a 128th, and a 356th. And it can actually go on theoretically indefinitely. But once you get beyond this, what you end up is that whatever rhythm, if you're playing percussion, actually starts to resemble a tone because it gets so fast that it is, in fact, creating its own tone. So we typically don't see rhythm beyond 30-second notes. In percussion, we can see 64th notes, but that's usually rolls. If you're hearing drum roll, those are technically 64th notes. All right. So how do we build a beat? So we are going to be creating 3 layers of beats. One's going to be basically just the bass drum. One is going to be just the snare, and one's going to be the hi-hat. With our bass drum line, I want you to keep it simple with a combination of just quarter notes. Snare, you can use a combination of the quarter, eighth, or 16th notes, but only on the 2nd and 4th beat of the measure. And that's because, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we want to really avoid at least the first beat of the measure. And on the hi-hat, have at it. Make it awesome. Make it not awesome. Make it interesting. Honestly, I don't really care. But I need something, right? But this one can be 2 measures long or it can be 1 measure long when we build it. So how do we build it? Well, let's dive into it. Let's go right into NoteFlight. So NoteFlight, when you create a new score, which is what I would like for you to do, you're going to come up with this. It's going to default with the piano. And we don't need the piano. We need unpitched percussion. So we're going to go up here to our parts icon, and we're going to add a part. We're going to go into unpitched percussion right here, and just go to our standard drum kit, just like so, and create. There we go. We now have piano and drums. But like I said, we don't need the piano, so we can go over here and hit the trash can to delete the piano. As you can see, there's no treble or bass clef. It's percussion clef, okay? Meaning that it's not telling me where middle C is or where F is. It's just telling me that percussion-wise, they have different spots. So like my bass drum is going to be on what in the bass line would be C. And then I can move that up to snare, toms, cymbals, hi-hat, And that's typically what you'll find is that it's actually related to the MIDI assignments built into keyboards. And so while technically this isn't C, on your keyboard it's also C bass clef. Anyways, we have one drum line. We need two more, so I'm going to quickly go back. Standard. And we're going to add one more because there's no shortcut to copy it like there is in Logic. And there we go. I can then change this to bass, this to snare, and this to hi-hat. And that gives me an idea of what they are to do. Now, you can go crazy at this point, and some people do, and they get confused, get themselves basically tied in a knot of confusion when it comes to rhythm. And the reality here is that you want to keep things pretty simple. So if you have a bass drum just like this, what you end up is just like a driving kind of bass beat, like, right? Please understand that the MIDI sounds are just as standard here. We are going to have the ability to change those when we have them into Logic. But for now, it kind of gets the whole point. Now, remember how I said we want to avoid the snare drum on the 1. So what you have to do is kind of choose a quarter note rest and leave it there. And that's because it really doesn't like to be on 1. Or I should say, I don't like it on 1. And typically, a lot of people don't like it on 1. If you're coming up with dance music, nobody's going to like it on 1. If you put it on 1, it's going to sound like a my goodness, a really bad dance song from like, it's just bad. And I'll explain that in a second. So again, I'm keeping things simple. This is just an example. I have my bass and snare, so now I got this standard kind of rock drum beat. And my hi-hat, by the way, shortcut to get out of edit mode or out of playback mode is hit escape a few times. You can tell you're in playback mode if it's not showing when it says to go back to edit. You can go all the way up here and click it, but it's easier just to hit escape. All right, so my hi-hat line is actually going to be in the top, right at the top of the staff right there. And here, I can go kind of crazy and kind of coming up with different rests and maybe like a dotted 16th note, which would be, no, let's not do a dotted 16th note, but I could change the tempo here. Nope. I want to keep everything on the same line. Don't stray away from having everything on one line. Again, we want to keep things clean and simple for now. There's going to be some opportunity to take some leeway and add different embellishments later, but for now, don't make your life complicated. Keep it simple. Now, I'm going to just kind of keep on plugging away, changing the note length once it's there. We talked about syncopation. We didn't. I mentioned it. Syncopation is when you have something on the offbeat. So like here, this right here would be kind of a syncopated drum beat. So if we were to listen to it, I want to add 4 more 16th notes here. 16th, 16th, and do I leave the rest? We'll see. Hold on. Play. So I've only done one measure because the wonderful thing about Noteflight is that you can use copy and paste. And so if I want to come up with a 4-measure drum beat, I just copy. Come on, why don't you? Shift is not working like it used to, which is slightly disappointing. And one more. There we go. You know what? I do want to have that 16th note there because it gives too much stress on this beat right here, which is the and of 4. And it just, the word that comes to mind is hokey. It feels cheesy and kind of lame. But if I add that 16th note there, I'm just going to add the rest of them. It changes it. Yeah. Now, what would happen if I were to change this, if I were to put the snare on the 1? Listen to it again now, as it is. Where, honestly, the exciting part is the hi-hat. That's kind of where we're drawing everybody's attention to. The bass is driving the beat. The snare is kind of just an accent to the bass drum. But the hi-hat is where things are like awesome. If I were to change my snare drum, if I were to add that, if I were to change this, if I were to just offset it, it would sound like this. And automatically my brain's like, no, stop it. You know, classic Michael Scott screaming no moment, right? Your brain hurts. It does not like what it's hearing. It definitely wants it to be on the offbeat. And so I'm gonna hit undo because I do not like do not like it at all. I can kind of, what would happen if I were to just have this on the and a 4? If you put a stress on the and a 4, that's syncopation, where you have kind of the opposite of what you might think. Let's see. That's not bad. Let's do this. Copy it for the rest of them. And here's my drum beat. Ta-da! Great. Wonderful. Save. And now I export this. I'm going to export this as a MIDI file. Continue. And that export is complete. It's down here. And now I can open up a Logic project. Let's do a new one. Remember that when you drag in a MIDI file, it doesn't matter what kind of track you have, it's going to generate its own track. And because there's information in this, well, good morning. Yes, Sibelius just decided to open up. I'm going to cancel that. And here's my drum beat. Then you might be thinking to yourself, oh, where's the snare? Sometimes the translation does not work all the time. And so if I go into here, what you can see is that it's not on snare. It's on low tom. And so I can just quickly adjust it and bring it down to snare. Snare rim shot. There it is. But at this point, I can change this around. I can go here and I can decide, I don't want that. I want to have electronic, awesome drum kits. And what's nice about having it separate is that you can have different drum kit sounds for different things. Like you might like the seismic bass drum, which is definitely not a bass drum. It's also low tom. I don't know why. not what I expected. So keep in mind, Logic wonderfully has things laid out. There we go. And if I wanted to go to snare for the for my snare, if I wanted seismic for my hi-hat, and here's my drum beat. And I can go in and change things a little bit. I like that. But let's be honest, the 808. All right. And there I have it. I have my drum beat. Can't ask for anything more than that. And I can go ahead and repeat it. I can adjust it. I can subtly bring in the snare when I want it to be in. Can switch. There's a lot of flexibility in what you can do for arrangement. So that's how we are going to be designing our drum beats. And honestly, it's a great way, a great pattern, a great method to come up with drum beats if you're kind of coming up with different beats for whether it be electronic music or hip hop or rap, whatever your genre of choice. Dividing it up, you can even add more layers. But 3 layers is a lot as it is, and gives you quite a variety of different embellishments and different designs right there. So make sure you go through this process. Don't keep things simple. Follow the pattern or come up with your own patterns, but keep in mind to stay off of the 1 on the snare. Other than that, have fun.